Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel. If you're new here, please subscribe. I'd really love that. If you're returning, how you doing? So what we're going to talk about today is a document that came out of the Office of Commissioner Brendan Carr, C-A-R-R. And Brendan Carr, he opposes a plan to give the administrative state effective control of all of the internet services and infrastructure in the United States. So I ask you, is this good or bad?
Is this good or bad?
So I'm going to read this to you in its entirety, okay? Now, it starts off by saying, this unlawful power grab chooses central planning over free market capitalism. Democrats have been in charge of the FCC and administrative agencies in DC for approaching 12 out of the last 16 years. They have had the opportunity over that stretch of time to put in place nearly any federal telecom policy of their choosing. In fact, the federal government has allocated hundreds of billions of taxpayer dollars for the purpose of ending the digital divide, while Democrats have run the administrative state. After all of that time and after all of that spending, this administration has concluded that the Democrats' policies are not working. The administration's broadband policies are failing. The cost of building internet infrastructure in this country have skyrocketed thanks to this administration's inflationary policies. The administration has no plan for filling a now empty spectrum pipeline, one that is vital to America's economy and geopolitical leadership. Meanwhile, the FCC is just sitting on spectrum that could connect millions of Americans to new 5G services. The administration has needlessly blocked and delayed new broadband infrastructure builds. Fiber and cell site components are laying fallow in warehouses and laydown yards across the country due to the government's failure to remove regulatory red tape. Permitting reform has gone nowhere, and this administration is preparing to waste additional taxpayers' dollars through its multi-billion-dollar Internet for All initiative by pursuing political goals at the expense of connecting Americans. But this administration is taking away all of the wrong lessons from its failed broadband policies. Rather than righting the ship, the administration is going hard left. It is now blaming the private sector and free market capitalism itself for the administration's own policy shortfalls. The problem the administration has apparently concluded is that the FCC has never gone full command and control when it comes to regulating the internet. So last month, the president gave the FCC its marching orders, and the president called on the FCC to implement a one-page section of the 2021 Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act by adopting new rules of breathtaking scope, all in the name of digital equality. For the first time ever, those rules would give the federal government a roving mandate to micromanage nearly every aspect of how the internet functions, from how the ISP allocate capital and where they build, to the services that consumers can purchase, from the profits of that ISPs can realize how they market and advertise services, to the discounts and promotions that consumers can receive. Talk about central planning. Needless to say, Congress never contemplated the sweeping regulatory regime that the president asked the FCC to adopt, let alone authorize the agency to implement it. Nonetheless, the commission will vote next week on November 15th to put the plan in place. A draft of the FCC order implementing the plan is available. Please do your own research, okay? It's easy to find, so you can form your own opinions and your own conclusions when it comes to this, okay? Because what I may think, it might be completely different from what you may think, all right? So the plan hands the administrative state effective control over all internet services and infrastructure in this country. Never before in the roughly 40-year history of public intranet has the FCC, or any federal agency for that matter, claimed this degree over control of it. Indeed, the President's plan calls for the FCC to apply a far-reaching set of government controls that the agency has not applied to any technology in the modern era, including Title II common carriers. The closest analog would be the heavy-handed rules the FCC applied to mobile telephone monopoly during the height of the New Deal era, a copper wire period of time when it was hard to distinguish between the government regulator and the telephone provider. But you don't have to take my word for any of this, okay? Like I said, please do your own research, form your own opinions and conclusions. The text of the order expressly provides that the FCC would be empowered for the first time to regulate each and every ISP, network infrastructure deployment, network reliability, upgrades, maintenance, customer premises equipment and installation, speeds, capacities, latency, data caps, throttling, pricing, promotional rates, imposition of late fees, opportunity for equipment rental, installation time, contract renewal terms, service termination terms, and use of customer credit and account history, mandatory arbitration clauses, pricing, deposits, discounts, customer service, language options, credit checks, marketing or advertising, contract renewal upgrades, account termination, transfers to another covered entity, and service suspension. Now, as exhausting as it is to listen to all of this, and for me to even read any of this, it literally gives you a headache, because the FCC itself says that it is not an exhaustive list. Well, yeah, it kind of is. This administration's plan empowers the FCC to regulate every aspect of the internet sector for the first time ever. And the plan is motivated by an ideology of government control that is not compatible with the fundamental precepts of free market capitalism. I mean, so hello, communism and socialism all wrapped into one little ball with a bright red bow on it. But it does get even worse. The FCC, they are reserving the right under this plan to regulate both actions and omissions, whether reoccurring or in a single instance. In other words, if you take any action, you will be liable. And if you do nothing, you will be liable. There is no path to complying with standardless regime. Okay, it depends, or no, it really doesn't depend. It reads like a planning document drawn up in the faculty lounge of a university's Soviet studies department. Okay, so this plan sweeps entire industries with the FCC's jurisdiction for the first time in the agency's 90-year period. And it would be one thing if the FCC cabined its intrusive new regime to ISPs or even businesses with the communications sector, but it doesn't. The draft FCC order says that we are not explicitly tasked with regulating entities outside of the communications industry, which is a rare moment of regulatory humility. But it then goes on to say that the FCC will do so in this case nonetheless, and if the moment passed. And landlords, they're now covered. Okay, construction crews are covered. Marketing agencies are covered. Banks are covered. The government itself is now covered, all newly regulated by the FCC and liable for any act or omission that the agency determines has an impermissible impact on a consumer's access to broadband. So Congress never authorized the FCC to regulate these industries or the entities. So to all the businesses and individuals that will be subject to FCC regulation for the first time ever, we all need to get really good lawyers. That's all I'm saying. So this plan also allows the FCC to impose unfunded build mandates on ISPs and unlimited monetary fines on every covered entity. There's a section, look this up, section 60506, the one-page portion of the infrastructure law that the president cites as authority for the FCC's new regime does not authorize the commission to create or enforce new punitive liability rules or compel builds. Instead, it directs the FCC to facilitate equal access to broadband internet access service. So nonetheless, the FCC's draft order determines that the agency will apply the full suit of the Communications Act enforcement powers to any act or omission that violates its new section under this 60506 regime. Although it will do some with like minor deviation from the Communications Act norm, it imposes no ceiling on the level of potential fines. And this means that the ISPs could very well be compelled to build out internet infrastructure without compensation. And every decision from the C-suit to the call center will be subject to FCC second guessing. So this also includes price controls. Last month at the 11th hour, the FCC slightly softened its proposal to use its Title II proceeding to regulate broadband rates. Now we know why. The section of 60506 order that the FCC will vote next week expressly states that the FCC can use it to regulate broadband pricing and even ISP profitability. Title II is no longer necessary to achieve that, but the section 60506 rules do more than just that. The FCC arrogates to itself the power to review and determine the lawfulness of promotion, pricing, and discounts, even if it puts the use of credit checks in the crosshairs. But of course, Congress, they did not give the FCC the power to do any of this. So the agency just creates it out of like thin air, if you will. And this plan also adopts an expansive and disfavored theory of liability that Congress neither directed nor authorized the FCC to adopt. Like I said, this section 60506 of the Infrastructure Act speaks in brief and straightforward terms. It states that it is the policy of the United States that insofar as technically and economically feasible subscribers should benefit from equal access to broadband. And section 60506 then directs the FCC to adopt rules that facilitate equal access to broadband, again, to the extent technically and economically feasible, and to prevent and eliminate digital discrimination based on income, race, ethnicity, color, religion, or national origin. So after nearly 2 years and several rounds of comments, the FCC's draft order concludes that there is no evidence or little evidence in the agency's record to even indicate that there has been any intentional discrimination in the broadband market without the meaning of the statute. But instead of proceeding with this fast forward looking rules on that bias, the FCC, and by the president's direction, reads an expansive and disfavored theory of liability into the law that exists nowhere in the statutory texts. Even in the absence of any evidence of intentional discrimination, this plan states that the FCC can impose potentially unbounded liability if the agency finds that some act or even failure to act happened to result in a disparate impact based on the FCC's own judgment. So, talking about this theory of liability into the laws that conflict with the Supreme Court's civil rights as precedent here, the FCC should not adopt this. But in the end, the FCC could have adopted rules that lawfully and faithfully implemented Congress's decision on the Infrastructure Act. The FCC could have taken concrete steps that would have extended high-speed internet services to more Americans. In fact, the FCC cites a few such actions in its draft order that were raised in the record, including eliminated government-imposed barriers, the regulatory red tape that have been slowing down the broadband builds. But instead of going that route, the FCC opts for this ideological approach instead. So for you, what I'm going to do is in the description box below, I'm going to leave a link so you can read the president's plan. Okay, so I mean, it's extensive, I'll say that. It's 218 pages long. Okay, but if you want to read it, go right ahead. But my honest opinion, they're not doing this so everybody can have access to the internet. They're doing this to track more people on the internet. Like I said, is this good or is this bad? I mean, it could be good, because we're catching the scumbags of the earth doing things and looking at things and watching things that they shouldn't be doing. But on the other hand, they can now more accurately, I should say, track our purchases, track our searches. What sites do you go to all the time to get your news, who you're watching on YouTube and whatnot. You know what I mean? So is this good or is this bad? You form your own opinions and then get back to me, okay? All right, guys, I'm out of here. I will see you in the next one, all right? You stay safe, you stay positive, you keep prepping, and as always, fear less. Ciao.